The courtroom fell silent as they tore the silver wings from my chest. Each rip of fabric felt like another piece of my soul being stripped away. But I kept my spine straight and my eyes forward. They wanted me to break, to cry, to beg for mercy I knew would never come. Instead, I gave them nothing but the cold stare I'd perfected in places they couldn't pronounce, doing things they'd never have the stomach for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Sarah Chen, the tribunal chairman, announced, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. You stand accused of insubordination, unauthorized engagement with hostile forces, and willful destruction of government property valued at $7.3 million. His fingers drummed against the mahogany table as he spoke, each tap like a countdown to my professional execution. The media cameras rolled, broadcasting my disgrace to millions of viewers who saw only what they wanted to see, another rogue soldier getting what she deserved. They had no idea what I'd sacrificed for their comfortable ignorance, what I'd done to keep their children safe in their beds at night. The brass had made sure of that. My real service record was buried so deep in classified archives that it might as well have been written in invisible ink. As they forced me to turn around, preparing to strip away the last vestiges of my uniform, I caught sight of my reflection in the courtroom's polished windows. 28 years old, though I felt ancient. Black hair pulled back in regulation style that would soon mean nothing. Scars hidden beneath fabric that told stories I could never share. My grandmother's jade pendant, the only piece of my old life I still wore, caught the harsh fluorescent light. "Remove your jacket, Captain," the military prosecutor ordered, his voice dripping with the kind of satisfaction that came from destroying someone's career on live television. That's when I made my choice. Not the choice they expected, not the submissive compliance they'd grown accustomed to from their subordinates. I reached for my uniform jacket myself, slowly unbuttoning each brass button they'd made me polish countless times during basic training. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one they'd never forget. The jacket fell to the floor with a soft whisper of fabric against marble. Beneath it, I wore only a standard-issue white undershirt, the kind every soldier had worn in basic training. But as I turned around, following their silent gestures, the courtroom's atmosphere changed in an instant. My back was a canvas of ink and scar tissue, each mark telling a story they'd tried to erase from official records. At the top, in elegant script that curved across my shoulder blades, were the words, "Classified. Kill count 247. Below that, coordinates of places that didn't exist on public maps. Dates that corresponded to operations that had never officially happened. Names of teammates who died in wars the public would never know were fought. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Camera operators zoomed in, their lenses capturing details that would make headlines around the world. The tribunal chairman's face had gone ashen, his drumming fingers now completely still. He knew what those numbers meant, what that ink represented. They all did. But the viewers at home, the civilians watching this supposed military justice being served, they had no context for what they were seeing. To them, I was just another disgraced soldier with an excessive tattoo collection. They couldn't read between the lines of scarred flesh to understand that each mark represented a life taken in service of their safety, a mission completed in places where failure meant death for thousands. The tattoo artist had been a former Navy SEAL named Marcus, operating out of a basement shop in Quantico that existed in the gray space between official military installations. He specialized in memorial ink for operators whose service could never be publicly acknowledged. When I'd first walked into his shop 3 years ago, fresh from my 5th deployment, I'd been a different person entirely. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked, studying the design I'd sketched on a coffee-stained napkin. "Once this ink goes on, there's no pretending you're just another paper pusher." I'd nodded without hesitation. The pretending was what was killing me slowly, the constant performance of being ordinary when I carried memories that would break civilian minds. The tattoo wasn't just documentation, it was ownership of what I'd become in service to my country. My story began not in some dramatic moment of destiny, but in the quiet desperation of a college dropout working double shifts at a Seattle coffee shop. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5, carrying dreams of American success that I'd systematically destroyed through poor grades and poorer choices. By 21, I was drowning in student debt with no degree to show for it, living in a studio apartment where the heating barely worked and the neighbors' arguments kept me awake most nights. The Army recruiter found me on my lunch break, sitting on a bench outside the coffee shop where I'd just been written up for giving a free latte to a homeless veteran. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was exactly what you'd expect from military recruitment: pressed uniform, practiced smile, and promises that sounded too good to be true. Sarah Chen, he'd said, somehow knowing my name before I'd introduced myself. 21 years old, studied computer science before dropping out, fluent in Mandarin and English, no criminal record, no dependents. You're exactly what we're looking for. The way he rattled off my life details should have been a red flag, but desperation makes people overlook obvious warnings. I was broke, directionless, and tired of disappointing everyone who'd ever believed in me. The military offered structure, purpose, and most importantly, a way out of the dead-end existence I'd created for myself. What Staff Sergeant Rodriguez hadn't mentioned during his recruitment pitch was that certain test scores flagged candidates for additional screening. My ASVAB results, particularly in pattern recognition and strategic thinking, had apparently caught someone's attention in ways that went far beyond typical military placement. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was exactly the hell I'd expected. Drill sergeants who treated sleep deprivation like an art form, physical challenges that pushed bodies to their breaking points, and the systematic destruction of individual identity in favor of military uniformity. I'd gone in as Sarah Chen, coffee shop dropout, and emerged as Private Chen, property of the United States Army. But somewhere during those 16 weeks of controlled chaos, something unexpected happened. The challenges that broke other recruits seemed to sharpen something inside me. Where others struggled with sleep deprivation, I found a kind of hyper-focus that made complex problems feel simple. Where others cracked under pressure, I discovered reserves of calm that surprised even me. My marksmanship scores were exceptional, but not impossibly so. My physical fitness ratings were above average without being superhuman. My psychological evaluations showed exactly the kind of stable, trainable mindset the military valued. On paper, I was a model soldier with potential for advancement through conventional channels. The reality was far more complex. During night training exercises, I began noticing things that others missed. Movement patterns in darkness that revealed enemy positions before they were tactically visible. Sound variations that indicated equipment malfunctions or personnel changes. Environmental details that provided strategic advantages my instructors hadn't taught us to recognize. My drill sergeants noticed these observations but attributed them to natural aptitude rather than anything extraordinary. It wasn't until the advanced placement testing that my true capabilities began to surface in ways that couldn't be easily explained or ignored. The testing facility was located in a nondescript building outside Fort Leavenworth, staffed by personnel whose uniforms bore no identifying marks beyond basic rank insignia. The exercises were unlike anything we'd encountered in basic training: complex scenario simulations that required split-second decisions with incomplete information, psychological assessments that probed moral boundaries most people never had to consider, and physical challenges that seemed designed to identify capabilities rather than build them. One test involved a hostage rescue simulation with multiple possible approaches and outcomes. Most candidates chose conventional tactical solutions or requested additional resources. I found myself analyzing patterns in the scenario that suggested the entire situation was a setup, identifying the real threat as internal rather than external, and developing a response that neutralized the actual danger while appearing to follow standard protocol. The evaluator said nothing during the exercise, but I caught them exchanging glances that suggested my performance had revealed something they'd been specifically looking for. After 3 days of testing, I was called into a private meeting with a woman who introduced herself only as Colonel Morrison. Colonel Morrison was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough classified operations to understand the weight of secrets. She wore no decorations on her uniform, no indicators of specialization or assignment. Everything about her presence suggested she operated in the spaces between official military structures. "Private Chen," she began, consulting a file that seemed far thicker than my brief military record should have warranted. "Your test results indicate capabilities that go beyond standard military applications. We'd like to offer you an opportunity for advanced training." The phrase "advanced training" carried implications that hung in the air between us like smoke. This wasn't about becoming a better soldier in any conventional sense. This was about transformation into something the official military structure could never acknowledge or directly control. "What kind of training?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be deliberately vague. Colonel Morrison's smile was the kind that revealed nothing while promising everything. The kind that prepares you for missions that don't officially exist, against threats that can't be publicly acknowledged. "Sarah, you have the potential to serve your country in ways that go far beyond anything you've imagined." The choice she offered wasn't really a choice at all. I could continue through standard military training, serve my term honorably, and return to civilian life with veterans' benefits and conventional job prospects. Or I could disappear into a world of classified operations where my capabilities would be developed into something unprecedented, where success would never be publicly acknowledged and failure would likely be permanent. Looking back now, as I stood in that courtroom with my secrets literally written across my skin, I understood that Colonel Morrison's offer had been the moment my ordinary life ended and something far more dangerous began. The tattoo on my back didn't just record kills, it documented the systematic transformation of Sarah Chen, college dropout, into something the world would never fully understand. The numbers inked across my shoulder blades represented more than enemy combatants eliminated. They were a countdown to the person I'd once been, each mission carving away pieces of the civilian identity I'd never fully appreciated until it was gone. By the time I'd earned the right to that tattoo, Sarah Chen, the coffee shop worker, had become as fictional as the cover stories I used in the field. But standing there in the courtroom, feeling the weight of public judgment and media scrutiny, I realized that my most dangerous mission was just beginning. They thought they were destroying my career by stripping away my uniform, but they'd actually revealed the one thing I'd spent years keeping hiding. The world was about to discover what happens when someone with my capabilities is no longer bound by military discipline or official oversight. They'd created me through their classified programs, shaped me through their impossible missions, and now they'd set me free through their own public humiliation. The real story was just beginning. The facility Colonel Morrison brought me to existed in the kind of legal limbo that made congressional oversight impossible. Located 3 hours north of Fort Bragg, it appeared on no official military maps and received funding through appropriations so deeply buried in defense budgets that even seasoned accountants couldn't trace the money flow. The sign at the gate simply read Blackwater Research Institute, which told me absolutely nothing about what happened inside. My new quarters were a significant upgrade from basic training barracks. A private room with an actual door, a desk, and a window that looked out onto pine forests that stretched to the horizon. The isolation was deliberate, I realized. Whatever they planned to do to me here required complete separation from the outside world. The other candidates were already waiting in the common area when I arrived. 12 individuals, all roughly my age, all carrying themselves with the particular kind of alertness that suggested military backgrounds. But there was something else in their eyes, a quality I'd begun recognizing in my own mirror reflections. They'd all scored high on whatever tests identified people like us, people whose capabilities extended beyond normal military parameters. "Welcome to Project Nightingale," announced Dr. Elena Vasquez, a woman in her 40s whose lab coat couldn't quite hide the tactical awareness that marked her as former military herself. "Over the next 18 months, you'll undergo training designed to optimize capabilities you didn't know you possessed." The name Elena Vasquez meant nothing to me then, but I would later learn she'd been one of the few survivors of an earlier enhancement program that had been shut down due to psychological casualties among participants. Her job now was to refine those techniques, to push human performance beyond recognized limits without destroying the subjects in the process. Our days began at 4 in the morning with physical conditioning that made basic training look like recreational therapy. But these weren't standard military exercises designed to build generic fitness. Every movement, every challenge, every seemingly impossible task was calibrated to identify and develop specific neurological pathways that connected conscious thought to instinctive response. I discovered I could process multiple streams of sensory information simultaneously, tracking conversations happening in different parts of a room while simultaneously analyzing environmental threats and calculating tactical responses to hypothetical scenarios. During marksmanship training, I found myself hitting targets at distances that should have required specialized equipment, my body making micro-adjustments that seemed to bypass conscious thought entirely. The psychological conditioning was far more disturbing than the physical challenges. Dr. Vasquez introduced us to scenarios that tested moral boundaries most people never had to consider. Simulated hostage situations where saving innocent lives required sacrificing others. Intelligence-gathering operations where maintaining cover meant allowing preventable deaths to occur. Combat scenarios where the distinction between enemy combatants and civilians became deliberately unclear. Conventional military training teaches you to follow orders, Dr. Vasquez explained during one particularly challenging session. Your training teaches you to make decisions that no one else can make, in situations where hesitation means failure, and failure means death for people who will never know you existed. The other candidates responded to these challenges in different ways. Some thrived on the moral complexity, finding clarity in impossible decisions. Others struggled with the weight of hypothetical consequences, their performance degrading as scenarios became more ethically ambiguous. 3 candidates were quietly transferred back to conventional military assignments after suffering what the staff euphemistically called adaptation difficulties. I found myself somewhere in the middle, neither embracing the moral flexibility nor rejecting it entirely. Each scenario felt like a test not just of tactical capabilities, but of fundamental identity. Who was I willing to become in service of protecting others? What lines was I prepared to cross when crossing them might prevent greater harm? The technical training was unlike anything I'd imagined possible. We learned infiltration techniques that bordered on the supernatural, methods of reading micro-expressions that revealed thoughts before speakers were conscious of them, and combat skills that seemed to violate basic physics. But the most disturbing lessons involved what Dr. Vasquez called compartmentalization protocols. Your future operations will require you to maintain multiple identities simultaneously, she explained during a briefing that felt more like a psychological dissection. Sarah Chen, the person you were before coming here, needs to become a performance you can put on when necessary. Your operational identity must be someone who can do things Sarah Chen would find morally impossible. The identity separation training was methodical and brutal. We practiced switching between personas like actors rehearsing different roles, except these roles involved genuine psychological reconstruction. I learned to access different emotional states, different moral frameworks, different ways of processing information based on mission requirements. Slowly, I began to understand that they weren't just training operatives. They were creating people who could function in the gray spaces between official government actions and deniable operations. We were being shaped into weapons that could be deployed without leaving fingerprints on the political process. My first field exercise took place in a mock urban environment constructed within the facility's boundaries. The scenario involved extracting a high-value target from hostile territory while avoiding civilian casualties and maintaining operational security. Standard special operations fare, or so I thought, until the mission parameters were fully revealed. The high-value target was actually one of the other candidates, someone I'd trained alongside for months.
The hostile forces were played by instructors using non-lethal weapons that still caused significant pain. Most disturbingly, the civilian population included facility staff members who had no knowledge they were part of the exercise, meaning any mistakes would have real consequences for innocent people. I moved through the simulated city like a ghost, my enhanced awareness allowing me to track multiple threats simultaneously while avoiding detection. The extraction itself required precision that went beyond anything I'd previously attempted, but somehow my body knew exactly what to do. Muscle memory that shouldn't have existed guided me through techniques I'd never been formally taught. The mission succeeded, but success came with a psychological cost I hadn't anticipated. The candidate I'd extracted looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and fear that suggested she'd seen something in my operational persona that scared her. During the debriefing, Dr. Vasquez noted that my performance had exceeded expected parameters. "Sarah," she said privately after the session ended, "you're adapting to the training faster than any previous candidate. That's both an asset and a potential liability." The warning should have concerned me more than it did, but I was already too deep into the transformation process to step back and evaluate what I was becoming. Each successful exercise, each challenge overcome, each boundary crossed felt like progress towards something meaningful rather than movement away from the person I'd once been. My psychological evaluations during this period showed concerning patterns that I wasn't allowed to see at the time. Sleep disturbances, emotional numbing, and what the psychologists termed moral flexibility indicators that suggested my ethical framework was undergoing systematic reconstruction. But these warning signs were interpreted as positive adaptations rather than red flags requiring intervention. The advanced weapons training introduced me to equipment that officially didn't exist. Sniper rifles with capabilities that exceeded anything in public military specifications. Communication devices that operated on frequencies reserved for operations that couldn't be detected through conventional monitoring. Explosives designed for surgical precision that could eliminate specific targets without affecting surrounding areas. But the most significant development wasn't technological.
It was the gradual emergence of abilities that seemed to transcend normal human parameters. Pattern recognition that allowed me to predict opponent behavior several moves ahead. Situational awareness that extended beyond normal sensory input. Physical coordination that enabled precision under conditions that should have made accuracy impossible. Dr. Vasquez documented these developments with the enthusiasm of a researcher witnessing unprecedented results. But I began to suspect that my enhancement wasn't entirely natural. Medical examinations became more frequent and invasive, focusing on neurological function and brain chemistry in ways that suggested they were monitoring the effects of treatments I wasn't being told about. The revelation came during my 15th month of training, when a security breach allowed me to access files I wasn't supposed to see. Project Nightingale wasn't just identifying and training individuals with exceptional capabilities. It was artificially creating those capabilities through pharmaceutical interventions that enhanced neuroplasticity and accelerated adaptation to extreme training protocols. The drugs weren't just performance enhancers. They were consciousness-altering compounds that rewired fundamental brain chemistry, making subjects more responsive to conditioning while reducing psychological resistance to morally questionable orders. Every meal, every medical treatment, every vitamin supplement had been carefully calibrated to transform us into something that was no longer entirely human. The knowledge should have horrified me, but my enhanced psychology processed the information with clinical detachment that proved how thoroughly the conditioning had already worked. I was no longer capable of the emotional response that Sarah Chen would have had to discovering she'd been systematically drugged and psychologically manipulated. Instead, I found myself analyzing the tactical implications of my enhanced state. If the modifications made me more effective at protecting innocent people from threats they couldn't handle themselves, wasn't the personal cost acceptable? If becoming something less than human allowed me to prevent greater suffering, wasn't that a worthy trade? These thoughts weren't entirely my own anymore, I realized. They were the product of programming that had been layered into my consciousness through months of pharmaceutical manipulation and psychological conditioning. But recognizing the artificial nature of my thought patterns didn't give me the power to resist them. By the time our training concluded, I had become exactly what Project Nightingale had intended to create: someone with superhuman capabilities and the psychological flexibility to employ those capabilities without being paralyzed by conventional moral constraints. Someone who could kill when necessary, lie when required, and sacrifice anything, including personal relationships and individual identity, in service of larger strategic objectives. The graduation ceremony was attended by officials whose faces I recognized from classified briefings, but whose names I was never told. They reviewed our performance records with the satisfaction of people who had invested significant resources in a successful outcome. Dr. Vasquez's final evaluation described me as the program's most successful subject, someone whose transformation had exceeded all projected parameters. But success in Project Nightingale meant something far different from conventional military achievement. It meant becoming someone who could be deployed against threats that required solutions conventional forces couldn't provide. It meant accepting missions where failure would be buried along with everyone who knew they had happened. As I received my new operational assignment orders, I understood that Sarah Chen, the college dropout, had died sometime during the previous 18 months. What remained was an operational asset designated Nightingale 7, someone whose capabilities existed specifically to handle situations where normal rules didn't apply. The person who had entered that facility seeking purpose and direction was gone forever, replaced by something that had been designed from the ground up to function in the spaces between official government action and deniable operations. I had become exactly what my country needed me to become, which meant I was no longer entirely sure what I had been before. My first operational assignment took me to a place that didn't appear on any civilian map, a region where 3 hostile nations converged and territorial disputes provided perfect cover for activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The mission briefing was delivered by Commander Walsh, a man whose scarred hands and 1,000-yard stare suggested he'd seen enough black operations to understand what he was asking of me. "Target designation Victor 9, he said, sliding a classified dossier across the steel table. "Real name Alexei Volkov, former Spetsnaz turned arms dealer. He's been supplying advanced weaponry to terrorist cells across the Middle East, including the group responsible for the embassy bombing in Cairo last month." I studied the intelligence photographs, memorizing facial features and behavioral patterns with the enhanced cognitive processing that had become second nature. Volkov was careful, paranoid, and protected by a network of mercenaries who'd been paid enough to die for him. Conventional military approaches would result in a firefight that would destabilize an already volatile region. "Elimination parameters?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would involve methods that left no American fingerprints. Commander Walsh's expression remained neutral as he outlined mission requirements that transformed assassination into something resembling surgical precision. Single target termination, 0 collateral damage, complete deniability. The kind of impossible parameters that had become routine for someone with my capabilities. The insertion took place during a sandstorm that provided natural cover for my infiltration of Volkov's compound. I moved through the chaos like a predator perfectly adapted to its environment, my enhanced senses allowing me to navigate by sound and air pressure variations when visibility dropped to 0. The storm that had grounded conventional aircraft and paralyzed normal military operations became my tactical advantage. Volkov's security team never knew I was there until it was too late. 12 hardened mercenaries, all eliminated through methods that looked like accidents or internal conflicts. A slip on wet stairs during the storm. A gas leak that went undetected until it was fatal. Equipment failures that had tragic consequences. By the time I reached Volkov himself, his protection detail had been systematically neutralized without anyone realizing they were under attack. The arms dealer died believing he was suffering a heart attack brought on by stress and poor health, never suspecting that the mild respiratory irritation he'd experienced earlier was actually the delivery mechanism for a compound that would stop his heart exactly 47 minutes after exposure. His death appeared so natural that local authorities never even investigated the possibility of assassination. Mission completion was confirmed through intelligence intercepts that showed his weapons supply network collapsing within hours of his death. 3 planned terrorist attacks were aborted due to lack of equipment. An estimated 400 civilian lives were saved through actions that would never be publicly acknowledged or officially documented.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I should have felt satisfaction at preventing so much potential suffering, but the pharmaceutical modifications to my brain chemistry had dampened emotional responses that might interfere with operational efficiency. Instead, I experienced only the clinical satisfaction of a successfully completed assignment and the anticipation of my next deployment. The pattern continued for 8 months. Targets eliminated, networks disrupted, threats neutralized through methods that left no trace of American involvement. Each mission pushed my capabilities further beyond human norms, requiring precision and tactical awareness that seemed to evolve with every challenge I encountered. But it was the assignment in Prague that first cracked the psychological conditioning that had made these operations possible. The target was Dr. Natasha Kozlov, a biochemist who'd been developing weapons-grade pathogens for a rogue state's biological weapons program. Intelligence suggested she was weeks away from completing a respiratory agent that could kill millions if deployed in a major urban center. The complication was her 7-year-old daughter, Anna, who'd been included in the mission parameters as a potential security risk. Dr. Kozlov had been discussing bringing the child to her laboratory where she might accidentally observe classified research. The possibility of a 7-year-old becoming a security liability had been noted in my mission briefing with the same clinical detachment used to describe weapon specifications. I found them in a small cafe near Prague's Old Town Square, the scientist and her daughter sharing ice cream while discussing the child's upcoming school play. Anna Kozlov was bright-eyed and animated, explaining her role as a princess in a fairy tale production with the kind of innocent enthusiasm that belonged to a world far removed from biological weapons and international espionage. Dr. Kozlov listened to her daughter with obvious affection, occasionally brushing the child's dark hair away from her face with the gentle attention of a mother who genuinely cherished these moments. The woman who'd been developing pathogens capable of mass destruction was also someone who remembered to bring tissues for her daughter's runny nose, and who smiled at childish jokes that weren't actually funny. My enhanced tactical awareness had already identified 17 different methods for eliminating both targets without attracting attention. The cafe's layout provided multiple exit routes, the afternoon crowd offered sufficient cover for various elimination techniques, and the timing was perfect for operations that would appear accidental. But as I watched Anna Kozlov describe her princess costume in exhaustive detail, something in my program psychology began to fracture. The child represented innocence in its purest form, someone whose worst crime was forgetting to put her napkin in her lap while eating ice cream. The mission parameters that classified her as a security risk suddenly seemed not just wrong, but monstrous. For the first time since completing Project Nightingale, I experienced genuine moral conflict that cut through pharmaceutical conditioning and psychological programming. The Sarah Chen who'd once worked in a coffee shop and worried about student debt was still somewhere inside Nightingale 7, and she was screaming protests that couldn't be ignored. I made a decision that would define the rest of my operational career. Dr. Kozlov would die as planned, but her daughter would be protected regardless of mission parameters. The classified research would be destroyed, the biological weapons program would be permanently disrupted, but Anna Kozlov would grow up to perform in her school play. The elimination took place in the laboratory that evening, after Dr. Kozlov had returned alone to complete research that she believed would secure her daughter's financial future. She died quickly, a single injection that stopped her heart while she worked on calculations that would never be completed. Her research notes were destroyed through methods that made the destruction appear accidental, and her laboratory samples were contaminated beyond recovery. But I'd also done something that violated every protocol I'd been taught. I'd contacted Czech social services anonymously, providing information that would ensure Anna Kozlov was placed with family members who could care for her. I'd established a trust fund through intermediaries that would pay for her education and support. I'd taken actions to protect the child that went far beyond mission requirements and directly contradicted orders that had classified her as expendable. The after-action report I submitted made no mention of these unauthorized activities, but I knew the surveillance technology surrounding my operations would have detected them eventually. When Commander Walsh debriefed me upon my return, his questions focused heavily on my decision-making process during the Prague assignment. Nightingale 7, he said, using the designation that had replaced my actual name in all official communications, your mission completion time exceeded projected parameters by 47 minutes. Explain the delay. I provided a cover story about unexpected security complications that had required tactical adaptation, but Walsh's expression suggested he knew there were elements of the operation I wasn't reporting. The debriefing continued for 3 hours, probing every detail of my time in Prague with the intensity of an investigation rather than routine mission review. Dr. Vasquez's psychological evaluation 2 days later confirmed what I'd already suspected. The pharmaceutical conditioning that had suppressed inconvenient moral responses was beginning to break down, not through chemical degradation, but through what she termed identity reassertion syndrome. Your enhanced capabilities continue to exceed all projections, she explained, studying brain scans that revealed neural activity patterns I wasn't allowed to see. But the psychological modifications are becoming less stable. The original personality construct is attempting to regain dominance over the operational identity. The clinical language couldn't disguise what she was really telling me. Sarah Chen was fighting to reclaim control from Nightingale 7, and the internal conflict was making me unreliable for missions that required absolute moral flexibility. The solution they proposed was additional pharmaceutical intervention, stronger psychological conditioning, and possibly surgical modifications to brain structures that were generating unwanted ethical responses. I would become more effective as an operational asset, but whatever remained of my original identity would be permanently erased. The choice they offered wasn't really a choice at all, much like Colonel Morrison's recruitment pitch years earlier. I could submit to additional conditioning that would complete my transformation into a perfect weapon, or I could be transferred to a containment facility where enhanced individuals who'd become security liabilities were held indefinitely. But there was a third option they hadn't considered. The same capabilities they'd enhanced to make me an ideal assassin also made me capable of disappearing from their oversight entirely. Enhanced situational awareness meant I understood their surveillance methods. Improved tactical thinking allowed me to identify vulnerabilities in their security protocols. Supernatural precision gave me the ability to eliminate obstacles that stood between me and freedom. That night, I made a decision that would transform me from government asset to something far more dangerous. I would use everything they taught me, every capability they'd enhanced, every technique they'd programmed into my neural pathways, but I would use these tools for my own purposes rather than theirs.
The escape from the Blackwater Research Institute was accomplished through methods that violated every assumption they'd made about my loyalty and psychological conditioning. 12 security personnel were neutralized non-lethally but permanently, their injuries ensuring they would never be operational again. Dr. Vasquez was left alive but with memory gaps that would prevent her from reconstructing the enhancement techniques used on me. Commander Walsh received a personal message that made clear I would be monitoring the program's activities going forward. Any attempts to create additional enhanced operatives would result in consequences that extended far beyond operational parameters he was prepared to consider. By dawn, I was hundreds of miles away from the facility, carrying with me complete documentation of Project Nightingale's methods and a list of every official who'd authorized my transformation. The government had created the perfect weapon, and now that weapon was no longer under their control. The manhunt that followed lasted months and involved resources that dwarfed most military operations. But they'd trained me too well, enhanced me too thoroughly, and given me capabilities that exceeded their ability to counter. I stayed ahead of their pursuit while simultaneously gathering intelligence on other black programs that were creating enhanced individuals for purposes that had nothing to do with protecting innocent civilians. What I discovered would eventually force me to make choices that would define not just my future, but the future of human enhancement itself. The government hadn't just created individual weapons like me. They'd established an entire infrastructure for transforming people into assets that existed outside democratic oversight or constitutional protection. And I was about to declare war on the entire system that had made me what I'd become. The intelligence I'd stolen from Project Nightingale revealed a network of enhancement programs operating across multiple government agencies, each developing different aspects of human modification with no oversight or coordination between them. The CIA had been working on cognitive enhancement through neural implants. The Navy was experimenting with physical modifications that allowed extended underwater operations. The Air Force had created pilots whose reaction times exceeded anything previously recorded in human subjects. Most disturbing was the discovery that these programs were being coordinated by a shadow organization that operated above traditional military hierarchies. The Enhanced Assets Coordination Committee consisted of officials whose names appeared nowhere in public records, but whose influence extended through every classified program involving human modification. Director Thomas Hartwell was the name that appeared most frequently in the stolen documents, someone who'd been overseeing enhancement research for over 2 decades while maintaining complete invisibility from congressional oversight or public scrutiny. His signature appeared on authorization forms for experiments that violated every ethical standard governing human research, including several that had resulted in subject deaths that were later classified as training accidents. Finding Hartwell required skills that went beyond conventional investigation. He existed in layers of security and misdirection that made his physical location nearly impossible to determine through normal intelligence gathering. But my enhanced pattern recognition abilities allowed me to identify behavioral signatures in classified communications that revealed his operational patterns. He moved between safe houses on a rotation that appeared random but actually followed subtle mathematical sequences. His meetings were scheduled using codes that referenced historical events in ways that created predictable timing patterns. Most importantly, he maintained contact with family members whose protection requirements created vulnerabilities in his otherwise impenetrable security. Hartwell's daughter lived in a suburban Virginia home under an assumed identity. Her real relationship to him buried in classified genealogical records that would have been impossible to trace without access to multiple database systems. She worked as a pediatric nurse at a local hospital, living the kind of ordinary life that served as perfect cover for someone whose father had spent decades creating human weapons. I spent 3 weeks conducting surveillance on Rebecca Hartwell, learning her routines and identifying opportunities for contact that wouldn't trigger security protocols. She drove the same route to work each morning, stopped at the same coffee shop twice a week, and visited her elderly mother every Sunday afternoon. Her life was predictably normal in ways that made it tactically accessible. The approach required delicacy that went far beyond my usual operational parameters. Rebecca Hartwell was innocent of her father's activities, someone whose only crime was genetic relationship to a man whose existence she probably didn't fully understand. Threatening her would have been both morally wrong and tactically counterproductive, since Hartwell would have had contingency plans for protecting family members through methods that would have made them inaccessible. Instead, I chose to make contact through circumstances that would appear coincidental. A car accident that required medical attention at her hospital, allowing me to be treated by someone whose professional instincts would override suspicion. The injury was real, self-inflicted, but carefully calculated to require treatment without permanent damage. Rebecca Hartwell was everything her father wasn't: compassionate, transparent, genuinely concerned about helping people without regard for personal advantage. As she cleaned and bandaged the laceration on my arm, she maintained the kind of professional conversation that revealed someone who found meaning in caring for others. "This is going to need stitches," she said, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "How did you say this happened?" I provided a cover story about a hiking accident that was plausible enough to satisfy casual inquiry. Rebecca worked with the focused attention of someone who took pride in doing her job well, regardless of who her patient happened to be. The contrast between her obvious decency and her father's systematic destruction of human dignity was both striking and painful. While she worked, I used enhanced observational skills to gather intelligence about her personal life. Family photographs that included faces I didn't recognize. Medical certifications that indicated specialized training in trauma care. Personal items that suggested hobbies and interests completely removed from the world of classified operations and enhanced warfare. But it was the locked drawer in her treatment room that provided the information I was actually seeking. Enhanced hearing allowed me to detect the specific sounds made by the locking mechanism, and enhanced manual dexterity made it possible to manipulate the lock while Rebecca was disposing of medical waste. Inside were personal letters that revealed her father's genuine care for her safety and his concern about threats that might target her because of his activities. The letters provided clues about Hartwell's location and movement patterns. But more importantly, they revealed something unexpected about his motivations. Thomas Hartwell wasn't just a career bureaucrat who'd lost track of ethical boundaries. He was someone who genuinely believed his enhancement programs were necessary for national defense against threats that conventional military forces couldn't handle. His correspondence with Rebecca discussed international developments that never appeared in public news reports. Terrorist organizations that had acquired advanced weapons through channels that bypassed traditional intelligence monitoring. Foreign governments that were developing their own enhancement programs with capabilities that threatened American strategic interests. Rogue scientists who were creating biological weapons that could destabilize entire regions. Most disturbing was the discovery that these programs were being coordinated by a shadow organization that operated above traditional military hierarchies. The Enhanced Assets Coordination Committee consisted of officials whose names appeared nowhere in public records, but whose influence extended through every classified program involving human modification. Director Thomas Hartwell was the name that appeared most frequently in the stolen documents, someone who'd been overseeing enhancement research for over 2 decades while maintaining complete invisibility from congressional oversight or public scrutiny. His signature appeared on authorization forms for experiments that violated every ethical standard governing human research, including several that had resulted in subject deaths that were later classified as training accidents. Finding Hartwell required skills that went beyond conventional investigation. He existed in layers of security and misdirection that made his physical location nearly impossible to determine through normal intelligence gathering. But my enhanced pattern recognition abilities allowed me to identify behavioral signatures in classified communications that revealed his operational patterns. He moved between safe houses on a rotation that appeared random but actually followed subtle mathematical sequences. His meetings were scheduled using codes that referenced historical events in ways that created predictable timing patterns. Most importantly, he maintained contact with family members whose protection requirements created vulnerabilities in his otherwise impenetrable security. Hartwell's daughter lived in a suburban Virginia home under an assumed identity, her real relationship to him buried in classified genealogical records that would have been impossible to trace without access to multiple database systems. She worked as a pediatric nurse at a local hospital, living the kind of ordinary life that served as perfect cover for someone whose father had spent decades creating human weapons. I spent 3 weeks conducting surveillance on Rebecca Hartwell, learning her routines and identifying opportunities for contact that wouldn't trigger security protocols. She drove the same route to work each morning, stopped at the same coffee shop twice a week, and visited her elderly mother every Sunday afternoon. Her life was predictably normal in ways that made it tactically accessible. The approach required delicacy that went far beyond my usual operational parameters. Rebecca Hartwell was innocent of her father's activities, someone whose The picture that emerged was of someone who'd authorized morally questionable programs because he believed the alternative was national vulnerability to threats that the public couldn't understand or accept. Hartwell wasn't evil. He was someone who'd made impossible choices while carrying burdens that couldn't be shared with people who lacked appropriate security clearances. This revelation complicated my plans for dealing with him significantly. Simple elimination would have been tactically straightforward but morally questionable if his activities were genuinely necessary for preventing larger catastrophes. But allowing him to continue programs that created unwilling human weapons was equally problematic from both ethical and strategic perspectives. The solution I developed required capabilities that exceeded anything I'd previously attempted. Instead of eliminating Hartwell, I would force him into a confrontation that would expose the truth about enhancement programs while simultaneously preventing their misuse for purposes that went beyond legitimate national defense requirements. Tracking him to his primary safe house required 3 weeks of patient surveillance and pattern analysis. The facility was located in rural Maryland, disguised as a private corporate retreat, but actually serving as a command center for coordinating enhancement programs across multiple agencies. Security was multi-layered and sophisticated, designed to prevent infiltration by anyone lacking specialized training and equipment. But the same capabilities that had made me useful for assassination missions also made conventional security measures largely irrelevant. I penetrated the facility's defenses like smoke drifting through gaps in armor, moving through sensor networks and guard patrols with ease that suggested they'd been designed to counter normal human infiltrators rather than enhanced operatives. Hartwell's office was located in the facility's most secure section, surrounded by countermeasures that should have prevented unauthorized access by anyone lacking proper credentials. But enhanced pattern recognition allowed me to identify vulnerabilities in electronic security systems, while supernatural precision made it possible to manipulate mechanical locks without triggering alarm protocols. I found him working alone at his desk, reviewing files that documented the psychological conditioning methods being used on current enhancement program subjects. His appearance was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd spent decades managing classified programs. Tired eyes that had seen too much classified information, gray hair that suggested the weight of carrying secrets that couldn't be shared, and the kind of controlled composure that came from making decisions that affected national security. "Miss Chen," he said without looking up from his reading, "I've been expecting you." The casual use of my real name shouldn't have surprised me, given his access to intelligence resources, but it confirmed that my operational security had been compromised at levels I hadn't anticipated. Hartwell knew not just where I was, but probably where I'd been and what I'd been doing since escaping from Project Nightingale. "Director Hartwell," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk while scanning the office for threats or recording devices. "We need to discuss the future of human enhancement programs." He finally looked up from his files, studying me with the analytical attention of someone evaluating a tactical situation. "What we need to discuss is whether you're going to continue being a problem or whether you can be convinced to return to productive service." The offer was presented with the same matter-of-fact directness that characterized all his communications. Hartwell wasn't threatening me or attempting psychological manipulation. He was simply outlining options in the same way he might discuss budget allocations or personnel assignments. "The programs need to end," I said, matching his directness with equally blunt honesty. "Creating unwilling human weapons violates every principle these programs claim to protect." Hartwell nodded as if he'd expected this response. "Miss Chen, you've seen classified intelligence reports. You understand the nature of threats we're facing from foreign enhancement programs and terrorist organizations with access to advanced weapons. How exactly do you propose we defend against these threats using conventional military capabilities?" The question cut to the heart of the moral dilemma that had been troubling me since discovering the scope of enhancement research. If hostile forces were developing their own enhanced operatives, didn't defensive necessity justify similar programs? If abandoning enhancement research left the country vulnerable to threats that conventional forces couldn't counter, wasn't continuing the programs the lesser evil? "By creating willing volunteers instead of manufactured weapons," I replied. "By establishing ethical oversight instead of operating in complete secrecy. by maintaining accountability to democratic institutions instead of hiding behind classification levels that prevent congressional review. Hartwell's expression suggested he'd heard these arguments before and found them idealistic rather than practical. Ms. Chen, willing volunteers don't produce the same results as subjects who've undergone comprehensive conditioning. Ethical oversight committees don't understand operational requirements that exist in classified environments. Democratic accountability doesn't function when the threats we're countering operate outside democratic constraints. The logic was seductive and deeply troubling. Hartwell was arguing that defending democracy required abandoning democratic principles, that protecting freedom required eliminating individual choice, that preserving ethical societies necessitated unethical methods. But I'd lived the reality of what these programs created, and I knew that the cure was becoming worse than the disease. Enhanced operatives who were psychologically conditioned to follow orders without question weren't just weapons against foreign threats. They were potential instruments of domestic oppression that could be turned against American citizens if political circumstances changed. "Director," I said, leaning forward to emphasize the seriousness of what I was about to propose, "I'm offering you a choice. End the programs voluntarily and help establish ethical alternatives, or I'll expose everything to congressional oversight and public scrutiny." Hartwell's laugh was bitter and knowing. "Ms. Chen, you're assuming that congressional oversight would result in program termination rather than expansion. What makes you think elected officials would choose ethical purity over national security when presented with evidence of foreign enhancement programs?" The question revealed a cynicism that was probably justified by decades of experience with political decision-making processes. Politicians who campaigned on ethical principles might make very different choices when confronted with classified intelligence about existential national security threats. But I'd already decided that the risk of political misuse was preferable to the certainty of continued abuse under current management. Whatever flaws democratic oversight might have, they were less dangerous than programs operating without any oversight at all. "Because," I said, standing to leave, "the alternative is having someone like me decide unilaterally what's best for everyone else. And I don't think either of us wants to live in that world." Hartwell's final words followed me as I prepared to exit his office through the same route I'd used for entry. "Ms. Chen, you're about to discover that some choices can't be unmade. Are you prepared for the consequences of the path you're choosing?" The warning would prove prophetic in ways I couldn't anticipate, but I'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. The time for compromise and negotiation had passed. What remained was action that would determine whether human enhancement would serve democratic values or destroy them entirely. The congressional hearing that would expose Project Nightingale and the broader network of enhancement programs required 18 months of careful preparation. Simply releasing classified documents would have accomplished nothing beyond landing me in a federal prison for espionage. The revelation needed to be structured in ways that would force meaningful reform rather than mere political theater. Senator Margaret Thornfield was the obvious choice for leading the investigation. Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, she'd built a reputation for holding intelligence agencies accountable to constitutional principles without compromising legitimate national security operations. More importantly, she'd been skeptical of black programs that operated without congressional oversight. Reaching her required methods that bypassed normal security protocols surrounding high-ranking elected officials. Enhanced infiltration capabilities allowed me to access her private office during a weekend when Capitol Security was operating with reduced staffing. The information package I left on her desk contained enough classified material to demonstrate the scope of enhancement programs while withholding operational details that could compromise active missions or endanger personnel. Senator Thornfield's response exceeded my expectations. Rather than simply calling for hearings, she coordinated with counterparts in the House to establish a joint committee with subpoena power and access to classified materials. The committee included members from both parties who shared concerns about programs operating beyond democratic oversight. But Hartwell and his organization weren't passive observers of these political developments.
Intelligence intercepts revealed they were implementing contingency plans designed to protect enhancement programs through methods that went far beyond conventional political influence. The first indication of their response came when 3 potential witnesses suffered fatal accidents within a 2-week period. Dr. Elena Vasquez died in a car crash that traffic investigators attributed to mechanical failure. Commander Walsh was killed during a training accident involving equipment malfunction that should have been impossible given standard safety protocols. A congressional staffer who'd been researching enhancement program funding was found dead in her apartment, apparently from a drug overdose despite having no history of substance abuse. The pattern was obvious to anyone with intelligence training, but carefully designed to appear coincidental to investigators lacking security clearances. Hartwell's organization was systematically eliminating people whose testimony could expose the true scope of human enhancement research. My response required capabilities that pushed beyond anything I'd previously attempted. Protecting potential witnesses meant providing security that was simultaneously invisible and comprehensive, countering threats from enhanced operatives using methods that left no evidence of intervention. The protection of Dr. Marcus Reeves, a neuroscientist who'd participated in cognitive enhancement research, demonstrated the challenges I faced. Intelligence sources indicated he was scheduled for elimination through methods that would appear medically natural. Enhanced surveillance capabilities allowed me to identify the threat team assigned to his termination, but neutralizing them required precision that exceeded normal human abilities. The 3 operatives responsible for Dr. Reeves' scheduled death were themselves enhanced individuals with capabilities similar to my own. They'd been positioned around his daily routine with instructions to eliminate him through methods that would mimic natural cardiac arrest. Confronting them directly would have resulted in a firefight that endangered civilians and revealed the existence of enhanced operatives to law enforcement. Instead, I used environmental manipulation to create circumstances that forced their mission to abort. A gas leak that required evacuation of Dr. Reeves' apartment building. Traffic accidents that blocked their escape routes. Equipment failures that compromised their communication systems. By the time they realized their mission parameters had become impossible, Dr. Reeves was under federal protective custody. But each successful intervention revealed more about Hartwell's resources and methods. The organization he controlled had access to enhanced operatives, advanced technology, and intelligence networks that rivaled those of major government agencies. They weren't just bureaucrats protecting questionable programs. They were a shadow government operating independently of constitutional oversight. The scope of their influence became clear when attempts were made to compromise the congressional investigation itself. Committee members received classified briefings that emphasized national security threats requiring enhanced human capabilities. Staff members were offered lucrative private sector positions that would remove them from oversight activities. Media outlets began reporting on terrorist threats that seemed designed to justify enhancement programs. Most concerning was the discovery that some committee members were being subjected to influence operations that went beyond conventional political pressure. Enhanced surveillance detected unusual activity around Senator Thornfield's residence, including personnel whose behavioral patterns suggested they possessed capabilities similar to my own. The realization that enhancement programs had been used to create operatives specifically for domestic political influence operations transformed my understanding of the threat they represented. These weren't just programs for creating weapons against foreign enemies. They were tools for subverting democratic processes whenever those processes threatened established power structures. Senator Thornfield's private meeting with me took place in a secure facility designed to prevent electronic surveillance, but I used enhanced hearing to confirm we weren't being monitored through methods that bypassed conventional security measures. She was exactly what her public reputation suggested: intelligent, principled, and genuinely committed to constitutional governance.
Chen, she began, studying documents I'd provided that detailed the scope of enhancement programs, what you've described represents a fundamental threat to democratic institutions. But the evidence you've presented would be dismissed as fabricated if we can't produce witnesses who can testify to these activities. The challenge was real and significant. Most personnel involved in enhancement programs were either dead, missing, or bound by classification levels that prevented them from discussing their activities. Those who remained alive were either loyal to Hartwell's organization or too frightened to risk exposure. "Senator," I replied, "there is one witness whose testimony would be impossible to dismiss or discredit." Her expression indicated she'd already reached the same conclusion I was leading toward. My own testimony, delivered by someone whose capabilities had been created through the programs I was exposing, would provide evidence that couldn't be explained away through conventional means. But testifying publicly would expose me to retaliation from organizations with resources that extended far beyond legal prosecution. Enhanced operatives would be deployed against me using methods that bypassed normal law enforcement protection. My survival would depend entirely on capabilities that might not be sufficient against coordinated attacks by individuals with similar enhancements. Senator Thornfield understood the risks I faced, but she also recognized the broader implications of allowing enhancement programs to continue operating without oversight. "Ms. Chen, if you're willing to testify, we can provide protection through methods that go beyond conventional witness security." The protection she offered included safe houses designed specifically for enhanced individuals, security teams trained to counter superhuman threats, and legal frameworks that would provide immunity for testimony about classified programs. But we both understood that determined opponents with unlimited resources could eventually overcome any defensive measures. The decision to testify publicly represented a fundamental choice about what kind of person I wanted to be. I could continue operating in shadows, using enhanced capabilities to protect specific individuals while allowing systematic abuses to continue. Or I could risk everything to expose programs that violated democratic principles, knowing that success might cost me my life. The hearing that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning in March, broadcast live on every major news network and watched by millions of Americans who had no idea their government had been creating enhanced human weapons. Senator Thornfield's opening statement outlined the scope of the investigation and the constitutional issues raised by programs operating without congressional oversight. But it was my appearance before the committee that transformed public understanding of what their government had been doing in their name. Walking into that hearing room, I knew that every enhanced operative Hartwell controlled would be watching, analyzing my testimony for vulnerabilities that could be exploited for retaliation. The questioning began with basic biographical information that established my credentials as someone with inside knowledge of enhancement programs. Military service record, training completion, operational deployments, and mission successes that could be verified through classified channels available to committee members. But when Senator Thornfield asked me to demonstrate the capabilities that had been artificially created through Project Nightingale, the hearing moved beyond conventional congressional theater into something unprecedented in American political history. The demonstration I'd prepared was carefully designed to reveal superhuman abilities while avoiding techniques that could be replicated for harmful purposes. Enhanced pattern recognition that allowed me to predict committee members' questions before they asked them. Situational awareness that detected security threats in the hearing room that hadn't been identified by conventional protective services. Physical coordination that enabled precision movements impossible for normal human anatomy. The committee members' reactions ranged from fascination to horror as they witnessed firsthand what government programs had created. But it was the media coverage that truly changed public understanding of enhancement research. Video footage of my demonstration was analyzed by experts who confirmed that normal human capabilities couldn't explain what viewers had witnessed. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, polls showed that 67% of Americans supported immediate congressional oversight of enhancement programs. Editorial boards called for investigations that extended beyond military applications to examine the full scope of human modification research. International allies expressed concerns about American development of capabilities that exceeded agreed-upon limitations on weapons research. But Hartwell's organization responded to these political developments with methods that demonstrated the existential threat enhanced programs posed to democratic governance. 3 committee members received death threats that analysis indicated came from sources with access to classified personal information. Senator Thornfield's family was subjected to surveillance that went beyond anything legal intelligence gathering would justify. Media outlets reporting on the hearings experienced cyber attacks that disrupted their broadcasting capabilities. Most disturbing was evidence that enhanced operatives were being positioned around key political figures not for protection but for potential elimination if oversight efforts continued. The same capabilities that had been created for foreign operations were being turned against American elected officials who threatened program secrecy. The realization that I'd initiated a conflict between enhanced operatives and democratic institutions forced me to confront the ultimate implications of what I'd become. The capabilities that made me useful for protecting innocent people also made me potentially destructive to the constitutional system I'd sworn to defend. The solution required accepting responsibilities that went far beyond anything I'd previously considered. If enhanced individuals posed an existential threat to democratic governance, then someone with similar capabilities needed to ensure they couldn't be used against constitutional institutions. The confrontation with Hartwell's enhanced operatives began 3 days after my congressional testimony, when intelligence intercepts revealed they were planning coordinated strikes against committee members, key witnesses, and anyone else who threatened program secrecy. 12 enhanced individuals, each with capabilities similar to my own, were being deployed against civilian targets with orders to eliminate threats to national security programs. Stopping them required accepting that I would be fighting others like myself, people who'd undergone similar conditioning and enhancement but remained loyal to the organizations that created them. Some of them might be acting willingly, committed to protecting programs they believed were necessary. Others might be psychological prisoners following orders they lacked the capacity to question. The first confrontation took place in Senator Thornfield's neighborhood, where 2 enhanced operatives had been positioned to eliminate her during her morning jog. Enhanced surveillance allowed me to identify their location and approach routes, but neutralizing them without exposing civilians to supernatural violence required precision that pushed my capabilities to their limits. The engagement lasted 17 minutes and covered 6 city blocks, a running battle between individuals whose abilities exceeded anything normal law enforcement could handle. Enhanced speed allowed movement that appeared as blurs to civilian observers. Supernatural accuracy enabled shots that curved around obstacles and found targets through gaps that existed for milliseconds. Environmental awareness permitted tactics that used urban infrastructure in ways that violated basic physics. When it ended, both operatives were alive but permanently incapacitated, their injuries ensuring they would never threaten civilians again while avoiding the moral weight of deliberate killing. But the engagement had been witnessed by dozens of people whose smartphone videos would soon be analyzed by experts trying to understand what they'd recorded. The pattern continued across multiple cities as I systematically neutralized enhanced operatives who'd been deployed against oversight efforts. Each confrontation was recorded, analyzed, and debated by media outlets struggling to explain phenomena that exceeded conventional understanding of human capabilities. But it was the final confrontation with Hartwell himself that would determine whether enhancement programs could be brought under democratic control or whether they would continue operating as shadow instruments of unaccountable power. 3 committee members received death threats that analysis indicated came from sources with access to classified personal information. Senator Thornfield's family was subjected to surveillance that went beyond anything legal intelligence gathering would justify. Media outlets reporting on the hearings experienced cyber attacks that disrupted their broadcasting capabilities. Most disturbing was evidence that enhanced operatives were being positioned around key political figures not for protection but for potential elimination if oversight efforts continued. The same capabilities that had been created for foreign operations were being turned against American elected officials who threatened program secrecy.
The realization that I'd initiated a conflict between enhanced operatives and democratic institutions forced me to confront the ultimate implications of what I'd become. The capabilities that made me useful for protecting innocent people also made me potentially destructive to the constitutional system I'd sworn to defend. The solution required accepting responsibilities that went far beyond anything I'd previously considered. If enhanced individuals posed an existential threat to democratic governance, then someone with similar capabilities needed to ensure they couldn't be used against constitutional institutions. The confrontation with Hartwell's enhanced operatives began 3 days after my congressional testimony. When intelligence intercepts revealed they were planning coordinated strikes,
Intelligence analysis revealed he was coordinating resistance efforts from a facility in Nevada, surrounded by the remaining enhanced operatives under his control and protected by technology that exceeded anything in conventional military arsenals. Reaching him would require infiltrating defenses designed specifically to counter someone with my capabilities. The approach took 2 days of careful movement across terrain that had been weaponized through methods that pushed environmental manipulation beyond recognized limits. Automated defense systems that could track enhanced individuals through sensor networks designed to detect superhuman movement patterns. Obstacles that required capabilities beyond normal physics to overcome. Security measures that had been calibrated specifically for my known abilities and tactical preferences. But Hartwell had made the same error that characterized all his strategic thinking. He'd assumed that enhanced capabilities could be precisely defined and countered through technological solutions. The reality was that enhancement had created evolutionary potential that exceeded any fixed parameters. When I finally reached his command center, the confrontation that followed would determine not just the future of enhancement programs, but the relationship between enhanced humans and democratic society. Hartwell was waiting in a room that had been designed as the ultimate test of enhanced human abilities. Every surface, every angle, every environmental factor had been optimized to provide tactical advantages to defenders while negating the benefits typically enjoyed by enhanced infiltrators. "Miss Chen," he said, surrounded by displays showing the congressional hearings that were dismantling decades of classified research, "you've accomplished something remarkable. You forced democratic institutions to confront capabilities they're not equipped to understand or control." The observation was accurate and deeply troubling. Congressional oversight of enhancement programs would inevitably lead to questions about what to do with enhanced individuals who already existed. People like me represented both tremendous potential for protecting innocence and existential threats to constitutional governance. "Director," I replied, studying the tactical situation while maintaining conversational engagement. "The programs needed oversight regardless of the complications that creates." Hartwell activated a device that filled the air with sonic frequencies designed to disrupt enhanced nervous systems. But my capabilities had evolved beyond the parameters used to calibrate his countermeasures. Instead of incapacitation, the sonic attack triggered adaptations that pushed my abilities into unexplored territory. "The question now," he continued, apparently unaware that his technological countermeasures were failing, "is whether enhanced individuals can coexist with democratic institutions, or whether you've initiated a conflict that will destroy both." The philosophical debate was interrupted by the arrival of 6 enhanced operatives who represented Hartwell's final defense against oversight and accountability. They moved with coordination that indicated shared training and tactical awareness that had been developed specifically for confronting someone with my capabilities. The battle that followed lasted 43 minutes and transformed the command center into a demonstration of what happened when enhanced human capabilities were pushed beyond all recognized limits. Movement that approached teleportation as enhanced speed reached theoretical maximums. Combat techniques that manipulated environmental physics in ways that violated basic scientific principles. Tactical awareness that bordered on prescience as enhanced pattern recognition predicted opponent actions with supernatural accuracy. When it ended, I stood alone among incapacitated operatives whose injuries had been carefully calibrated to preserve life while ensuring they would never again pose threats to democratic institutions. Hartwell himself remained conscious but restrained, his technological advantages neutralized through methods that demonstrated the futility of trying to control enhanced humans through conventional means. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who dedicated his career to protecting national security interests, "what happens now?
You've exposed programs that kept this country safe from threats most people can't imagine. You've demonstrated capabilities that make oversight meaningless since no normal human can enforce limitations on someone like you. What's your solution to the problems you've created? The question cut to the heart of dilemmas that had been troubling me since first discovering the scope of enhancement research. Democratic institutions required accountability and oversight, but enhanced individuals possessed capabilities that made such oversight practically impossible to enforce. Protecting innocent people from enhanced threats might require enhanced protectors, but those protectors would inevitably become potential threats themselves. The solution I developed during months of preparation required accepting responsibilities that would define the rest of my existence. If enhanced humans couldn't be controlled through conventional means, then they needed to be guided by principles that transcended normal legal frameworks. Director, I said, beginning the process of documenting everything we discovered about enhancement programs. Enhanced individuals are going to exist, whether anyone wants them to or not. The choice is whether they serve democratic values or threaten them. Over the following hours, I systematically dismantled the organizational structure that had allowed enhancement programs to operate without oversight. Files were transferred to congressional investigators who would ensure public accountability. Research facilities were secured to prevent continuation of unethical experimentation. Personnel involved in illegal activities were prepared for prosecution through legal channels that would respect constitutional principles. But the most important element was establishing frameworks that would allow enhanced individuals to use their capabilities constructively while maintaining accountability to democratic institutions. This required creating oversight mechanisms that could function even when dealing with people whose abilities exceeded normal human parameters. The testimony I delivered to Congress over the following months established precedents for how democratic societies could address capabilities that challenged traditional assumptions about human limitations. Enhanced individuals would be required to register their abilities with appropriate authorities, but registration would be coupled with legal protections that prevented discrimination or persecution. Oversight would focus on actions rather than capabilities, holding enhanced persons accountable for what they did rather than punishing them for what they were capable of doing. Most importantly, enhanced individuals would be offered opportunities to use their capabilities in service of society through programs that maintained constitutional accountability while recognizing the unique contributions they could make to protecting innocent people from threats that normal law enforcement couldn't handle. The public revelation of enhancement programs sparked debates that extended far beyond American borders. International allies demanded explanations for research that had been conducted without their knowledge. Human rights organizations called for investigations into programs that had violated basic principles of informed consent and human dignity. Scientific communities grappled with ethical implications of research that had succeeded in transcending recognized human limitations. But the most significant developments were domestic. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for congressional oversight of enhancement research, but also growing acceptance of enhanced individuals who demonstrated commitment to constitutional values. The revelation that people with superhuman capabilities were living among ordinary citizens initially caused fear and suspicion, but gradually evolved into recognition that enhanced individuals could serve beneficial social functions if properly integrated into democratic institutions. The tattoo that had started this entire revelation remained on my back, but its meaning had evolved. The kill count that had once represented classified operations now symbolized accountability and transparency. Each number documented actions that had been taken in service of protecting innocent people, but also choices that could now be examined through democratic oversight. The philosophical debate was interrupted by the arrival of 6 enhanced operatives who represented Hartwell's final defense against oversight and accountability. They moved with coordination that indicated shared training and tactical awareness that had been developed specifically for confronting someone with my capabilities. The battle that followed lasted 43 minutes and transformed the command center into a demonstration of what happened when enhanced human capabilities were pushed beyond all recognized limits. Movement that approached teleportation as enhanced speed reached theoretical maximums. Combat techniques that manipulated environmental physics in ways that violated basic scientific principles. Tactical awareness that bordered on prescience as enhanced pattern recognition predicted opponent actions with supernatural accuracy. When it ended, I stood alone among incapacitated operatives whose injuries had been carefully calibrated to preserve life while ensuring they would never again pose threats to democratic institutions. Hartwell himself remained conscious but restrained, his technological advantages neutralized through methods that demonstrated the futility of trying to control enhanced humans through conventional means. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who dedicated his career to protecting national security interests, "what happens now? You've exposed programs that kept this country safe from threats most people can't imagine. You've demonstrated capabilities that make oversight meaningless since no normal human can enforce limitations on someone like you. What's your solution to the problems you've created?" The question cut to the heart of dilemmas that had been troubling me since first discovering the scope of enhancement research. Democratic institutions required accountability and oversight, but enhanced individuals possessed capabilities that made such oversight practically impossible to enforce. Protecting innocent people from enhanced threats might require enhanced protectors, but those protectors would inevitably become potential threats themselves. The solution I developed during months of preparation required accepting responsibilities that would define the rest of my existence. If enhanced humans couldn't be controlled through conventional means, then they needed to be guided by principles that transcended normal legal frameworks. "Director," I said, beginning the process of documenting everything we discovered about enhancement programs, "enhanced individuals are going to exist whether anyone wants them to or not. The choice is whether they serve democratic values or threaten them." Over the following hours, I systematically dismantled the organizational structure that had allowed enhancement programs to operate without oversight. Files were transferred to congressional investigators who would ensure public accountability. Research facilities were secured to prevent continuation of unethical experimentation. Personnel involved.
Standing in the same courtroom where my uniform had been stripped away, I watched as the military tribunal that had once sought to disgrace me acknowledged the broader implications of what my testimony had revealed. The charges against me were dismissed, with recognition that my actions had exposed threats to constitutional governance that exceeded any individual misconduct. But more importantly, the military justice system established new frameworks for handling cases involving enhanced personnel. Courts-martial would now include experts capable of understanding superhuman capabilities. Legal protections would prevent discrimination based on enhancement status, and oversight mechanisms would ensure that enhanced individuals remained accountable to democratic institutions. The officer who handed back my uniform bore no resemblance to the person who'd been stripped of military honors months earlier. The experiences I'd undergone had transformed me into someone whose capabilities served democratic values rather than threatening them. But the uniform itself had also evolved, modified to include insignia that indicated enhanced status while maintaining integration with normal military hierarchy. As I left the courtroom, I understood that my story was not ending but beginning. Enhanced individuals would continue to exist, and their relationship with democratic society would require ongoing attention and careful management. Some would use their capabilities constructively, contributing to scientific research, law enforcement, and national defense through methods that respected constitutional principles. Others might pose threats that would require intervention from people like me. The intelligence networks I developed during my operational career would be redirected toward monitoring enhanced individuals who might threaten democratic institutions. The capabilities I'd gained through Project Nightingale would be used to protect innocent people from enhanced threats while ensuring that protection didn't evolve into control. Most importantly, the lessons I'd learned about the corruption of good intentions would guide decisions about when enhanced capabilities should be used and when they should be restrained. Senator Thornfield's final report on enhancement programs included recommendations that would reshape how democratic societies approached human capability research. Ethical oversight committees with meaningful authority, public transparency requirements that prevented secret experimentation, and legal frameworks that protected enhanced individuals while maintaining accountability to democratic institutions. But her most important recommendation was the establishment of an Enhanced Individuals Integration Office, a civilian agency responsible for helping people with superhuman capabilities find constructive roles in society while monitoring potential threats and providing support for those struggling with the psychological implications of enhancement. I accepted the position of director for this new agency, understanding that my experience as both enhanced individual and oversight target provided unique qualifications for helping others navigate the complex relationship between superhuman abilities and democratic citizenship. The office's first case involved a young woman whose enhancement had occurred through illegal experimentation, leaving her with capabilities she couldn't control and psychological trauma that conventional therapy couldn't address. She'd been living in isolation, terrified that her abilities would harm innocent people, and equally terrified that revealing her enhanced status would result in imprisonment or worse. Working with her required drawing on everything I'd learned about the relationship between enhancement and human identity. Enhanced capabilities didn't eliminate the need for human connection, purpose, or meaning, but they did create unique challenges that required specialized understanding and support. Over months of careful work, she learned to control abilities that had initially seemed unmanageable. More importantly, she discovered ways to use enhanced capabilities for purposes that provided personal fulfillment while serving beneficial social functions. Her work with search and rescue operations saved dozens of lives while demonstrating that enhanced individuals could integrate successfully into civilian society. But her case also revealed the ongoing challenges that enhanced individuals would face: public suspicion about people with superhuman abilities, legal uncertainties about rights and responsibilities, and practical difficulties of maintaining normal relationships while possessing capabilities that transcended human norms. The agency's work expanded to include public education about enhanced individuals, legal advocacy for those facing discrimination, and research into methods for helping enhanced persons maintain psychological stability while using capabilities that could isolate them from normal human experience. Each case reinforced lessons I'd learned through my own transformation. Enhanced capabilities were tools that could serve beneficial or harmful purposes depending on the character and choices of individuals who possessed them. Democratic oversight was essential for preventing abuse, but oversight needed to be informed by understanding of what enhancement actually involved rather than fear of what it might represent. Most importantly, enhanced individuals needed to remain connected to human values and relationships that provided meaning beyond their capabilities. The greatest danger wasn't that enhanced persons would become threats to society, but that they would become so isolated by their abilities that they lost touch with the humanity they were meant to protect. The annual report I submitted to Congress 5 years after the initial hearings documented both successes and ongoing challenges in integrating enhanced individuals into democratic society. Over 300 enhanced persons had been identified and provided with support services that helped them use their capabilities constructively. Crime rates involving enhanced individuals were actually lower than those for the general population, suggesting that proper support and oversight could prevent the kinds of abuses that had characterized secret enhancement programs. But the report also acknowledged that enhancement technology continued to develop, creating new categories of capabilities that would require ongoing attention and adaptation of oversight mechanisms. International cooperation was essential for preventing enhancement research from simply moving to countries with fewer ethical constraints. Most significantly, the report recommended establishing international frameworks for managing enhancement research and enhanced individuals, recognizing that superhuman capabilities couldn't be contained within national borders and required global cooperation to ensure they served beneficial rather than destructive purposes. The woman who had once been Sarah Chen, coffee shop dropout, had become something unprecedented in human history, not just because of her enhanced capabilities, but because of the role those capabilities had come to serve in protecting democratic institutions from threats that conventional oversight couldn't address. But sitting in my office, reviewing files of enhanced individuals who were using their capabilities to serve beneficial social functions, I understood that the most important transformation hadn't been physical or mental. It had been moral, learning to use extraordinary abilities in service of values that transcended individual power or institutional authority. The tattoo on my back had been joined by others over the years, not documenting kills but recording lives saved through careful use of enhanced capabilities. Each mark represented someone who'd been protected from threats they couldn't handle themselves, but also choices to use power responsibly rather than simply effectively. The broken rifle that had started everything was displayed in my office, a reminder that the most powerful weapons were moral principles that guided how capabilities were employed rather than the capabilities themselves. Every enhanced individual who worked with the agency learned that lesson, understanding that their abilities exist to serve humanity rather than dominate it. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges that would require ongoing attention and careful management. But the foundation had been established for enhanced individuals to coexist with democratic institutions in ways that strengthened rather than threatened constitutional governance. Standing at my office window, watching enhanced individuals train with conventional law enforcement officers in techniques that integrate superhuman capabilities with democratic values, I understood that the story that began with public humiliation had become something larger than personal vindication. It had become proof that extraordinary abilities could serve ordinary human decency, that power could be held accountable to principles rather than just pragmatism, and that evolution beyond normal human limits didn't require abandoning the values that made humanity worth protecting. The uniform I now wore bore insignia that indicated both enhanced status and commitment to democratic oversight, but more importantly, it represented integration rather than separation. Enhanced individuals weren't separate from human society, but part of it, contributors whose capabilities served collective welfare rather than individual advantage. The courtroom where everything had changed now hosted training sessions for judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officers who needed to understand how legal systems could accommodate individuals whose abilities exceeded normal parameters while maintaining equal justice under law. But the most important legacy wasn't institutional or legal. It was the demonstration that enhancement could strengthen rather than threaten human dignity, that superhuman capabilities could serve humane purposes, and that evolution beyond current limitations could still honor the best rather than the worst aspects of human nature. The kill count that had once represented classified operations nobody could acknowledge had become a foundation for accountability that anyone could examine. Each number told a story about choices made under impossible circumstances, but also about the possibility that extraordinary abilities could be guided by extraordinary principles. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.